In the wake of Varus's death, Asprenas and Tiberius had taken an overly cautious approach to the Rhine frontier, one that won them little glory and the ire of their men. The mutiny of 14 CE required that the ferocity of the legionnaires be turned away from the new emperor and into the unknown. At the head of that column was the young son of the man who had conquered Germania in the first place, the adopted son of Tiberius and heir to the Principate, Germanicus Julius Caesar. Welcome to our latest video on the Julio-Claudian dynasty of Rome, in which Germanicus will rally his legions and push deeper into Germania in pursuit of Rome's greatest enemy, Arminius, the betrayer of Teutoburg. Do you know why thousands of people on YouTube and Patreon support us financially? Because they get history you won't find anywhere else. We release 3 new exclusive videos every week. Plus, they get perks like early access to all videos, voting rights on upcoming series and videos, access to our private Discord, our production schedule, and much more. Right now, 250 exclusive episodes are waiting for members and patrons, including from our series on the Eastern Front of World War II, Spanish War of Succession, the Punic Wars, the Pacific War, the Iberian Reconquista, the Russian Revolution and Civil War, the North African and Italian campaigns of World War II, Sicilian Wars between the Greeks and Carthaginians, and many others. By joining, you're not only unlocking rare content, you're also supporting the stories you love. Your help allows us to keep producing 3 free videos per week while paying our team competitive salaries and growing the channel. Join via the links in the description, the pinned comment, or by pressing the join button under the video. Thanks for making this possible. Despite Tiberius's suspicions and his own bungling of the situation, Germanicus's loyalty in the mutiny of 14 CE had bought him a considerable amount of favour with the new princeps. However, the mutiny could quickly turn once more to attempted usurpation, and Germanicus has to redirect their attention through the winter months. To that end, 4 legions, totaling 12,000 men, 26 allied cohorts, and 8 cavalry alae were led across the Rhine to the frontier with the rebels, where a forward operating base was established. From there, the troops took a roundabout route into the territory of the nearby Marsi to maintain the element of surprise. When Germanicus's soldiers came down upon them, the attack coincided with a major autumnal feast, and the intoxicated Marsi were caught completely off guard. Tacitus notes the brutality of this assault, stating that Germanicus divided his army into 4 columns, ordering them to scorch a swatch of land 50 miles across and kill every man, woman and child within it. Shocked at this brazen disruption of the peace, the Bructeri, Usipetes and Tabantes laid a trap for Germanicus in retaliation for the massacre of the Marsi on the route home to Gaul. However, Germanicus was aware of the ambush thanks to reliable sources and scouting parties. He reformed his army into a hollow square to protect the baggage train, with the auxilia and cavalry as foreguards and rearguards. When his men had entered the forest, the Germani set upon the auxiliary cohorts at the rear, but Germanicus rallied the 12th Legion at the rear to drive them back onto open ground where the Germanic warriors were slaughtered. The need to keep the troops occupied may have been the driving force behind the subsequent campaign of 15 CE, where the cautious approach of the past 4 years was finally abandoned in favour of a much more aggressive, retaliatory operation designed to quash the rebellion and restore Roman authority to the Elbe. However, Germanicus saw an opportunity to turn that anger outwards when Varus's old foe, the Germanic chieftain Arminius, saw his coalition beginning to break apart. In an attempt to oust his father-in-law Segestes, Arminius had started an internal conflict between the rebelling peoples, providing Germanicus an opening to destroy him. The campaign of spring 15 CE was a massive undertaking, with all 8 Rhine legions, over 15,000 auxiliaries, and a large number of Germanic allies crossing the river in 2 columns, under the command of Germanicus and Aulus Caecinus Severus. This initial campaign was set to divide the Chatti from the Bructeri and Cherusci, allowing all 3 Germanic groups to be destroyed individually. Advancing against their capital, Latium, in the Taunus Mountains, Germanicus was able to locate Drusus's camp of 11 BCE that he had used against the Chatti, and refortified it as a forward operating base. The men of the Chatti, not yet ready for campaign, had fled across the Eder River to regroup, which left their settlements exposed, allowing the Romans to capture or slaughter all the women, children, and those too old or infirm to fight. The Romans attempted to bridge the Eder, while the Chatti harassed them, but the Germanic warriors were driven back by missiles. In no mood to parley, Germanicus bridged the river and razed Latium and the surrounding countryside, forcing the Chatti to disperse as he advanced to Drusus's fortress near Hedemunden, which he also re-established. Word of the attack quickly reached the Cherusci, who prepared to come to the Chatti's aid, only to find themselves outflanked by Caecina. The Cherusci were quickly devastated, but Arminius yet evaded capture. Caecina turned back towards Roman lands, only to run into the Marsi under their chieftain Malavendus, who tried to fight the Romans in a set-piece battle. Naturally, the Romans overwhelmed them in the engagement, returning safely to the Rhine. By the 24th of May, the Romans had returned across the Rhine, where they received the envoy Segimundus, son of Segestes, and still a Roman ally. Segimundus pleaded for Germanicus to rescue Segestes and his family, which Germanicus obliged, launching a lightning raid into the territory of the Cherusci, where he was able to locate and retrieve Segestes and the Germanic noblewoman Thusnelda, who was pregnant with Arminius' son. Returning to the Rhine, the Germanic sympathizers were promised a quiet retirement in Ravenna, to which they promptly departed with word of Germanicus' success. Tiberius was elated with the victories achieved by Germanicus, and their relationship was restored, with Tiberius allowing Germanicus to claim the title of Imperator a second time. He also allowed Germanicus to hold a triumph, an honor that Germanicus' father Drusus was never bestowed. After learning of the capture of Thusnelda and his unborn child, Arminius roused his people to prepare a massive and overwhelming strike at the Romans by crossing the Rhine. Germanicus was already aware of the mustering of this army, and prepared a campaign to dismember it before it could penetrate the Roman defense of Gaul. Once again, following in his father's footsteps, Germanicus sent a force of 40 auxiliary cohorts and allied Frisi under Caecina into the lands of the Bructeri along the river Ems. At the same time, Lucius Stertinius led another force from the south. While these two forces marched overland, Germanicus led 4 legions and the allied Chauci through the Canal of Drusus into Lacus Flevo, sailing along the North Sea coast to the mouth of the Ems, where his men disembarked upriver. Stertinius had already reached the region in a rapid march, engaging the Bructeri, who were abandoning their homes in the wake of the Roman advance. Left behind was apparently the Aquila standard of the 19th Legion, which Germanicus and Stertinius recovered, an omen and symbolic victory, bringing a huge morale boost to the Romans. Germanicus, Caecina and Stertinius regrouped and advanced towards the Teutoburger Wald, where Germanicus ordered Caecina and the surviving veterans to locate the site and prepare roads and bridges for the main body to advance. Upon his arrival, Germanicus set the men to work collecting the remains of the unburied soldiers and constructing a tumulus, with Germanicus himself being the first to overturn the sod and bury the first remains. Having completed the task, at least as far as was reasonably possible, Germanicus led his men against Arminius' army itself, which was awaiting nearby in the vicinity of the pass of Arbalo. It was near the pass where his father Drusus was ambushed that Arminius ambushed the advanced force of cavalry, who panicked and retreated into the column of auxiliary cohorts, causing mass confusion. Arminius pressed his advantage, driving the Romans towards a bog, as he had before at Teutoburg, only to be foiled by the arrival of Germanicus with the Roman legionaries marching in battle order. After a brief clash, Arminius' men retreated, and Germanicus snatched victory from the jaws of defeat, as Drusus had before. With the campaigning season coming to a close, Germanicus ordered his army split into 3 columns. Germanicus and his men returned to the patrol boats and transports on the Ems, where they had made camp to sail back to the Rhine. In contrast, the cavalry was ordered to follow the coast alongside them, as they could keep pace. Caecina's men had to take the direct overland route, however, which was arduous and took them through many potential ambush points. It was at a place called the Pontes Longi, built by Lucius Domitius Ahenobarbus 15 years before, that they had to stop and repair the wooden roads over the bogs. Caecina's men set about the task, harassed by Arminius, who cleverly redirected streams to flood the bog and the Romans' marching camp. Morale plummeted and discipline broke, and Caecina resolved to abandon as much baggage as possible and escape along the one passable route remaining through the bogs. Attempting to escape along the remaining road, the wagon train became stuck, forcing soldiers to attempt to push the wagons out of the mud, and sending the marching column into disarray. The army began to panic, the Signa were separated from the soldiery, and Arminius grasped the moment to attack the rear of the column. Hailing the Romans with missiles of all kinds and killing many of the pack animals and horses, Arminius' Cherusci quickly gained the upper hand, even throwing Caecina off his horse. However, the Germani were driven back when the First Legion, positioned at the head of the column, turned and came to the relief of their comrades in arms. The Romans pushed through the bog to the far side, where they found that they had lost many of their tools and tents and would be unable to erect a proper camp before nightfall. Hunger, fear, and low morale plagued the once disciplined soldiers, who, in the middle of the night, panicked as a horse broke free and disturbed the campsite, fleeing to the far wall. Recognizing that it was a false alarm, Caecina threw himself on the ground in the gateway between the ramparts, acclaiming that they would have to step over him in order to depart. The centurions were able to regain order, and Caecina convinced his men that they would have to stand and fight, because they would be destroyed if they continued to try to flee. When Arminius launched his assault on the Roman camp, his men found it poorly guarded, allowing them to fill in the ditch and scale the embankment with ease, breaching the defences. On the other side of the earthen rampart, however, they found the Romans in battle order and prepared to fight. Now on solid ground outside the bog, the Romans drove the Cherusci out of the camp and wounded one of the enemy leaders, Angrivarian, causing the Germanic warriors to rout. Although Arminius remained at large, Caecina was now able to rapidly retreat to the safety of the Rhine unhindered. Germanicus himself fared little better, as his cavalry and 2 legions under Publius Vitellius were accidentally trapped by rapid tides in their return march along the coast, sweeping the baggage train and many men out to sea. Only Stertinius arrived unscathed, managing to capture Segestes, the brother of Segestes, and another Segemundus, who had desecrated the body of Varus at Teutoburg. Surprisingly, Germanicus pardoned both men and offered them asylum. While he had taken significant material and manpower losses, the return of the Roman troops and the victories they had won counteracted these, as the provinces of the Tres Galli and Hispania came out to celebrate, donating immense sums of cash and replacement material. The opening of 16 CE heralded Germanicus' final war against Arminius, where he was determined to end the conflict once and for all. As the Tres Galliae had been stretched to its limit in supplying pack animals, Germanicus resorted to a seaborne expedition, building over 1,000 ships in the winter of 15 to 16 CE, which were capable of landing and supplying a force of 3 legions. Other events altered this plan, however, as Germanicus himself set out at the beginning of the year to alleviate the siege of Aliso, while sending Gaius Silius to defeat the Chatti and remove them from the war. Taking with him 6 legions, Germanicus advanced up the Lippe and alleviated the siege. He then proceeded further to the Tropaeum Drusi, erected in 9 BCE before the ominous death of Germanicus' father, where he restored the desecrated monument. Germanicus continued his advance up the Weser towards the Elbe, where he finally met Arminius in battle. The first engagement was brief and indecisive, as Arminius had attempted to lure his army into a trap by crossing the Weser. Still, Germanicus sent only the cavalry across to try and distract Arminius, only to be outflanked. Withdrawing, Germanicus learned from a defector that they were preparing to make a stand on the plain of Idistaviso the next day. Marching out of camp the next day, Germanicus crossed the Weser without incident and advanced to Idistaviso, where Arminius' army was waiting. The Germani launched an assault with their main body, which was visible on the plain, against the Roman auxilia in the front line. Germanicus responded by ordering his cavalry to outflank the main Germanic line, waiting until an omen of 2 eagles flying in the forest persuaded him to order the legionnaires to advance. Quickly pushed back, the Cherusci line broke and retreated, while their reserves rushed from the forest, causing Arminius and Angrivarian to be trapped in the confusion. Realizing the battle was lost, Arminius smeared his face in blood and grime to conceal his identity, and escaped with his men. Bodies and loot were strewn across 10 miles of battlefield, which were collected and heaped up into a tropaeum with Germanicus' name, much like his father's. Wisely, Germanicus and his men exclaimed the acclamation of Imperator not to Germanicus but to Tiberius. The Germani were incensed at the erection of another tropaeum, and quickly regrouped further up the Weser. Arminius and his allies changed strategies. Instead of attempting to fight the Romans on the open ground and ambush them with a second line of reserves, a tactic which had now failed twice, they opted to try and force the Romans into unfavourable terrain and trap them up against an embankment, much like they had done at Teutoburg. The Cherusci and Angrivarian selected a site along the Weser where a narrow plain passed between a swamp and a thick forested wetland. There he blocked the plain with a wall constructed by the Angrivarian and sent his cavalry and some skirmishers into the forest to prepare to ambush the Romans. Hoping to trap the Romans up against the embankment and outflank their rear, he anticipated a repeat of his great victory at Teutoburg. However, he had not accounted for the major differences that had led to that ambush being so successful from his current situation, namely in that he had had complete dominance over Roman intelligence and scouting capability. In contrast, Germanicus had not lapsed in his judgment as Varus had. The Roman scouts reported back about the erection of the earthwork, and Germanicus devised a counter-stratagem. Germanicus divided his army into 3 parts, with one part advancing through the forest to root out the ambush, another advancing along the plain to assault the Angrivarian wall, and the third held in reserve. The asymmetry of the engagement was counterbalanced by bringing up slingers and catapultae to pelt the Germani along the wall, making it much more difficult to defend against the assaulting Romans. Having caused Arminius' men to begin to waver, Germanicus himself brought the Praetorian cohorts up from the reserves to break the Germanic lines, driving them back into the forested wetlands they had placed their backs to. Another mass slaughter ensued, but Arminius and Inguiomerus again escaped. In the aftermath of the battle, Germanicus again erected a tropaeum, this time dedicated to Tiberius, declaring that all the lands from the Rhine to the Elbe had been restored to Roman authority. It would be the Romans' last monument in Germania. With the campaigning season now drawing to a close, the exit from Germania was once again disastrous for Germanicus. While the majority of his men were forced to march over land, Germanicus again took the seaborne route with some of his army. This time, as Drusus had experienced before, their ships were dashed upon the islands of the Wadden Sea in a storm, with only a few escaping. Having accepted the surrender of the Angrivari, their newfound subjects paid off, as Drusus's alliance with the Frisii had before. The allied Germans assisted Germanicus in the recovery of his ships, located stranded soldiers, and negotiated ransoms for captured Romans to return to their homeland. Hearing of the disaster, the Chatiant Marsi had taken the opportunity to revolt, but found themselves up against the main body of the Romans under Caius Silius, and were quickly crushed. There they learned the location of another of Varus's eagles, which Germanicus and his men recovered in a punitive raid against the Marsi. The campaign season finally drew to a close, with Germanicus returning to Ara Ubiorum. When Germanicus returned to the Rhine, he found his relationship with Tiberius soured, with the imperator demanding that he return to Rome immediately. Bewildered, Germanicus exchanged letters, begging for another year to finish the reconquest, but Tiberius refused. Thus, Rome's province of Germania was liberated not by Arminius' freedom fighters, but by Tiberius' own machinations. Next time, we'll explore the depths of this feud, as it comes to a head with the poisoning of Germanicus and the trial of Piso, and Tiberius' new, seemingly tyrannical model of imperial rulership. If you don't want to miss that and many other historical videos, make sure you are subscribed and have pressed the bell button to see it. Please consider liking, subscribing, commenting and sharing, it helps immensely. Our patrons and YouTube members can watch more than 200 exclusive videos. Join their ranks via the link in the description or by pressing the join button under the video to watch these weekly videos, learn about our schedule, get early access to our videos, access our private Discord, and much more. This is the Kings and Generals channel, and we will catch you on the next one.